justice,
and
peace, and peace
flow from my heart
from my heart forever.
Amen.
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 And I turn now to Anne for the readings.
As you may have read in the weekly e-blast, Kenko was a Japanese writer who lived from 1283 to 1350. He served as an officer of the guards at the imperial palace, but later in life, possibly as a result of the death of a cherished emperor or a case of unrequited love, he became a Buddhist monk and a hermit. The book entitled Notes from Leisure Hours is a collection of 243 of his short essays, some only a sentence or two long, on the beauty of nature, friendship, traditions, from the perspective of the Buddhist law of uncertainty and the transience of life. He wrote, "To sit alone in the lamplight with a book spread out before you and hold intimate converse with people of unseen generations, such is a pleasure beyond compare." His words have also been translated as, "To make friends with people of a distant past you have never known." The second reading is from an article on the value of reading old books. Michael Hyatt, a writer, podcaster, and instructor on leadership, notes that people in every era have their own particular outlook, good at seeing certain truths and blind to others. He quotes the later author and scholar C.S. Lewis, who advised, "The only palliative is to keep the clean sea breeze of the centuries blowing through your minds, and this can be done by reading old books." Otherwise, Lewis suggests, we are stepping out into the middle of conversation, having missed the earlier parts of what was said, the connections with the present. Reading old books lets you understand the whole conversation. During the perspectives this morning, we'll be noting how the values of respect and compassion for self, others, and the planet are part of the ages-long conversation between diverse members of the human race, or as Kenko put it, part of the intimate converse with people of unseen generations. We'll spend some time making friends with people of distant past, specifically the 1200s. Offered as wisdom for the journey, may we walk in its light.
May we walk in its light. Thank you, Anne. Those of you that can, I'm going to be taking you back to the 1200s for some context, and there's some pictures, really quite strikingly beautiful pictures. So you're welcome to come on the screen and watch this. I'll try and describe it, but I won't be describing in detail every picture. I'll give you a sense of what you're seeing, but it'll give you a flavor of this time that we're walking back into to have converse, which is a word we don't often use, converse with people of unseen generations that have walked before, but have recorded or been recorded by other folks. And so we bring them into our lives in the presence. I love the statement, if you haven't been in touch with people in the past, you've missed the beginnings of the conversation. And reading an old book or a book about someone who lived long ago gives you context for. And what I want to be focusing on this morning is that human conversation, the conversation of human being. And so first slide, Peter, and we're going to move through a lot of slides today. First PowerPoint slide. We've been using these words a lot in the past months. Oh, not yet, Peter, first one. Human being, and a human who is being, which is all of you, all of us. And then there's the being human, and that means so many different things to different people. But what we're trying to capture is the best of being human. And then we looked at the word humankind, and then somebody very cleverly separated it for us, and that humans to be kind in the same word. And I really hadn't put those 2000. I just breezed by the word humankind easily, but I love that, breaking it down. And so we're introducing, Anne read us a very ancient passage. So the next, that is a picture of the person that Anne read us as having written so long ago. His name is Kenko Yoshida, a Japanese author and a Buddhist monk. This is, of course, a rendition of him. He wrote a book called Leisure Hours and talked about the brevity of life. And I'm putting on this, the next is what Anne read, to sit alone in the lamplight with a book spread out before you and hold intimate converse with people of unseen generations. Such is a pleasure beyond compare. And I'm hoping that at the end of our time together, you will have found it a pleasure beyond compare, or something interesting for your life. Next is a picture of him doing that. There he is, a sketch of Kenko sitting in the lamplight with a scroll actually spread out before him, reading of someone who wrote something before him that he's taking into his life. The next picture is him, also another rendition of him reading from a scroll. I don't know what that says, but there he is reading. And the next shows him writing, which is why we can read him. So that's the introduction to the idea of unseen generations. So next is that theme again. We're looking at, even from the 1200s and long before that, but I've just chosen, and I don't remember why. I just chose the 1200s, and in we go to meet these folks who have thought and reflected and practiced these being human, and are representative, not their whole life, because man, they weren't perfect at all, which is really very hopeful for the rest of us, because there's no pinnacle of goodness in these people. There's just some goodness that came out of them. Next. Oh, sorry, that's just the next part of that slide with people of unseen generations. Next. So, human beings in the 13th century. Next. These are just some of the names you might know, but I'm not bearing down on them. Thomas Aquinas was a theologian. He actually a theologian who, as much as he honored his tradition, warned us all, beware of the person of only one book. Cool, huh? Beware of the person of only one book. And Eleanor of Aquitaine, I looked for a really punchy quote from Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she was the most powerful woman in the world at the time in the 1200s, became queen of various countries. And the statement I found from her was that she rode with her husband into the battle, evidently bare-breasted, and then mentioned that it dazzled the troops. And I just was picturing that for a moment, of course, not for too long. And I don't know whether she just meant there was an armor on their breastplates, but either way, she dazzled the troops. And then Dante, of course, if you read him, he's a chewy read, wrote epic tales. And the quote I liked from him that I found was, "I love to doubt." I love to doubt, which is a good thing about being skeptical of things that are being told you. So I wanted to give you a little flavor of what was going on in the 1200s so that the wisdom that we're going to look at has some context. And next, Kublai Khan invaded Japan in 1274 with 33,000 troops, but failed due to bad weather. Again in 1279 with 140,000 troops, but again failed due to a typhoon. The term kamikaze originates from these doomed efforts to prevail against overwhelming forces. And whatever you believe or don't believe, it was called the divine wind. I did not know the origin of the idea of the kamikaze going into a difficulty like that. Anne is going to read the next slide for us.
Right. In 1285, a Buddhist nun named Kakuzan Ni opened the Shokozan Tokai-ji temple as a refuge for battered wives. Women were considered divorced after living there for 2 years. Temple records show that during one period alone, an estimated 2,000 women sought shelter there. The temple lost its right to concede divorce in 1873 when a new law was approved and the Court of Justice started to handle the cases.
Quite amazing. I was very impressed with that. Way back then, problems were there and people trying to solve them. This is a little cut of some music. I wanted to get you into the 1200s feeling. So Peter's going to play for us some medieval music. Some of you may find it very calming. Some of you may find it very different, but soak yourself in. The people we're hearing from, this is the kind of music they were listening to. Very haunting. You can almost picture yourself in a medieval structure listening to that. The pictures were beautiful of the calligraphy and the drawings. So that's the kind of thing that would be heard in some areas of the world that these people lived in. Next. I just want to actually say on the side here that we keep Peter hopping, going in between music and PowerPoint slides, and he's there with us. So thank you again to Peter. Next. Ivan the Cabbage. I read that. I thought maybe that's what he was called. Ivan the Cabbage formed an army of peasants in 1277, conquered Bulgaria in 1278, ruled as emperor in 1279, was dethroned by the nobles in 1280, and fled to the Mongols, who promptly executed him. Just if you're having a bad day, you should read this slide again. This man was very unlucky in his war, and maybe that was a good thing, I'm not sure, but that's Ivan the Cabbage. And then I'm going to ask in the next slide, a little interesting fact of what they would have seen at the time. In 1280, Pisa was hit by a series of earthquakes that were believed to threaten the tower. However, it remained upright. Researchers later discovered that the soil, which is the cause of its lean, also protected it from the quakes, absorbing the shock of the tremors. So a double kind of edge there for the Tower of Pisa. And Anne will read us the next slide.
The papal election of 1268 to 71 was the longest in history. It took so long that the cardinals were locked in, their rations were reduced to bread and water, the roof of their hall was removed, and 3 died of old age.
Now, I'm sure you've been in long meetings. But I don't think you've ever been in that long a meeting. And so I think we should, at our board meetings or congregational meetings, if we see anybody yawn, we should flash that screen on and just put it into perspective. But those were the kind of things that were happening around the 1200s. And I have one more little clip of music for you. This is a more of a Gregorian chant sort of feel. But I wanted to say that this organum that is going to be played is where one voice starts and then other voices are added. And this is the first sort of polyphony where not just a soloist, but others form and the chant widens out with the other voices. What you'll see on the screen is the actual score of the music. And so picture yourself in the 1200s hearing this new type of music. This would be really cutting edge music for them. So Peter will play the next clip. The feel. Now there's lots of folk music too, but I wanted to take you into that, if we can even possibly erase all the music we've known and know that this is what we would be listening to. So into the 1200s we go, and the next slide introduces, I might be saying his name incorrectly, but the one pronunciation I found was Sadi, who was a Persian poet, scholar, and traveler and lived in the 1200s. He studied literature and science, and why I wanted to put the context in there, the literature to his time in the 1200s. So everything you know from then on was not known. So just that slice of literature and science, could you imagine the science in the 1200s? But he was studying it. And he started tea house discussions with merchants and farmers and thieves and beggars and preachers and the homeless. That's what I want you to get, the difference and the commonality of that. And when he would teach, he stressed the kinship of all humanity and the terrible effects of displacement. How current is that word, displacement, and the violence of war. He also said, he had many clever statements. One of them was, think and then speak. Stop before you're told to. That's always good advice for folks. But now I want to, the next slide shows you Sadi in a garden. I'm just going to go through these quickly just to give you the feel of it. The next slide is he's welcoming a youth to one of his discussions. Beautiful picture. The next is a copy of his work, copied much later in life. And then just to show you he's not still alive, the next is the mausoleum where he's buried. And the final one is the tomb in which he is buried, which is to say he was honored at his time. And the piece of wisdom I want you to look at is the next slide. Human beings are members of a whole in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain. Now that's been put into English rhyme, but it rhymed in his world. And these words are on the walls of the United Nations. And Obama used them in his speech about international relations. And the author where I was looking up, Sadi, also extended this to the whole approach to the pandemic, where it takes the whole world to be helping the whole world. And yet this was said in the 1200s. So I want us to attach ourselves, to connect to this. It was said then, we say it now. That statement could be a West Hill statement right now. It could be a humanitarian statement right now. It's just as fresh and alive and just as important. John Donne wrote, "No man is an island. No person is an island. We are so interconnected as we do." So again, next is that idea of another voice from the 1200s, Rumi. And many of you may be familiar with some of Rumi's works. Rumi was another Persian, actually, a poet, a jurist. He served as a lawyer. He was a theologian, a scholar of Islam, and a Sufi mystic. He wrote music, he wrote poetry. He promoted them as a chance to put one's whole being into an art form that we are trying to celebrate in our work at West Hill in ways that are farther than just the words. He held classes, he held forums together. The next, you may have known this phrase from him. Yes, okay, thanks, Peter. Doesn't matter, either are good. A counselor a long time ago told me this, and the statement riveted me to my inner core. Out beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there. That has been singularly powerful in my life. This picture here is Rumi gathering the mystics for a meeting. The next picture is another picture of him meeting with people, always meeting with people. The next picture is a front cover of his work, the collection of poems that he's written. And the next slide is a bowl of reflections, it's called, with his writing, and you can't read it unless you read that language, his writing around it. And in case you think he's still with us, this is his tomb. The next is his tomb, honored as he was, and the actual place he was buried is the next slide. Pretty ornate, pretty beautiful, recognizing those Islamic colors, or what they love, the blue with the orange, I love that. And his statement that we're bringing with us into the present is the next slide. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Let your teacher be love itself. That just riveted into my heart. Seeking for love, one thing, but to find the places in yourself where you've created a barrier to it. To a barrier to someone you know, to someone you've had a difficult time with, to the people we'll never meet on the other side of the planet. Do we have a barrier to their needs? Seek to find the barriers and let go. Let love be your teacher, or as we would say, our guide. And the next thing is, I think we can all resonate with this. Yesterday, I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today, I am wise, so I'm changing myself to be someone who can actually make a better difference in the world. The next person we're looking at is Roger Bacon. And I knew a little bit about him, but not as much. I wanted to say right away, this is a century where I couldn't find, and I did look for written material from women who were wise and cared. And it's a comment on the times and our way of doing history that I couldn't find very much. I found Eleanor bedazzling the troops, but it wasn't quite a statement of wisdom, or maybe it was, but it wasn't for lack of searching. And it is a comment on how women have not been recorded in history. And I think we talked about that in The Women Rock, which has changed their image of themselves by not being recorded. So, but Roger Bacon was an English philosopher, scientist, Franciscan friar, known as Dr. Mirabilis, the wonderful teacher. the wonderful teacher. He studied philosophy and science and math and astronomy and optics. And remember, this is the 1200s. So he didn't know any of what's taught in schools today. He was searching, he was seeking. And he wrote his opus, his magnus opus, his biggest work, was urging the Pope to accept needed reforms in the church and the universities, and also criticized his own Franciscan order to stop resisting the scientific method and rely only on recorded tradition instead. Very brave thing to say, very normal thing to say today, but in the 1200s, that was a very risky thing. So here's his picture as a statue. I don't think he sat for it, so we really don't know from how accurate that is. And then the next is from a museum. It's a diorama of Bacon presenting one of his works bravely to the chancellor of the university. The next is an engraving of him. I love this picture of him contemplating the universe, standing at an openness to the sky. The next is a manuscript of him presenting another work. So he kept on writing and kept on presenting, and because it got recorded, we can still see it. The next is amazing. It's a picture of light being refracted through a spherical container of water. So he was watching the light. This is, again, seems normal to us, but this was new. This was groundbreaking for him to do. I love the next picture. Roger Bacon discovers gunpowder. And for those of you that aren't seeing the picture, it's exploding on his desk and reeling him back in his chair. And the commentary said that this is an image from Bill Nye's Comic History of England, and said that, of course, from a British point of view, this is where Guy Fawkes was made possible in our fireworks explosion. And they commemorated Bacon in the next slide with a plaque in Oxford University. And the next slide is his wisdom for humankind. There are, in fact, 4 very different stumbling blocks in the way of grasping the truth, which hinder every person. So I want us to hear him talking from the 1200s, every person on our screens, which hinder us, however educated, and scarcely allow anyone to win a clear title to wisdom. We often talk about seeking wisdom. Here, Bacon is telling us from the 1200s what to watch for. Next, namely, the example of weak and unworthy authority, long-standing custom, the feeling of the ignorant crowd, and the hiding of our own ignorance while making a display of our apparent knowledge. That's a hard-hitting message from the 1200s, but he's saying these things stand in the way of our gaining wisdom. And so every one of you that has bumped into any of the others of you or someone else in your life to give a nudge to let go of these, then that kudos to all of us for doing that. And kudos to each of us who have accepted that kind of criticism, that kind of pointing out where you are blocking wisdom. If you've ever felt the punch of being confronted and then the release of getting wiser, it's really worth it. And Roger Bacon was guiding us in those directions. And the next thinker, Meister Eckhart, a German theologian, philosopher, and monk. He followed Eastern mysticism and did a great deal of meditating. And I wasn't much for meditating. I've grown to little bits and bobs of it. It's a way that can be done together as we do in the wellness meetings. But he was tried as a heretic by the Pope for his ideas, but was eventually deemed satisfactory and cleared of the charges. Resonating with many things today, but he was brave for that. Next is his picture. And next is him meditating in the garden. And next is him meditating in another garden. Oh, sorry, how did that get there? That's back a bit. Sorry, Peter. Go ahead, next. There's Eckhart meditating in another garden. And the next is a woodcut with the words around it. It is in darkness one finds the light. In sorrow, this light is nearest to us. And what Eckhart brings us from the 1200s about humankind, about learning the wisdom to be guided by love, is the next slide. One must not always think so much about what one should do, but rather about what one should be. Next. A human being has so many skins inside, covering the depths of the heart. We know so many things, but we don't know ourselves. Next. Why 30 or 40 skins or hides as thick and hard as an ox's or bear's cover the soul. Go into your own ground and learn to know yourself there. That statement right there is what we've done it together. We've done it on our own to let words of wisdom really get into who we are, not planning necessarily the next thing we're going to do, but let the wisdom soak into us. Let us find the places, as Bacon was saying, where we're blocking it and get to know it there. My counseling degree, the master's degree I did in counseling, we thought we were going to get a whole bunch of textbooks on how to help people because we already had ourselves together. For goodness sakes, we were counselors and we were taking courses in the seminary, and all the books were how to understand yourself, because the biggest tool you had in counseling was yourself. And for every block that you didn't examine and do something about in your life, you may be blocking a counselee's future. And so it was to get to know yourself and get to let those wisdoms really bump into things they need to bump into and do that work. The William of Ockham is our next and final person, an Italian poet, a politician, and a pharmacist. Now, picture a 1200s pharmacist. You might not actually want to take some of the things he's going to recommend to you, but maybe some of those things are still with us. He was accused of heresy by the Pope and spent 4 years under house arrest, during which time he studied the charge of heresy leveled by the Pope and the Dominican order, and decided that he was right and the Pope was wrong, and declared that the Pope, from prison, declared that the Pope was a heretic, which is a lovely, brave thing to do. And he also wrote a lot about the fact that whether you have a Pope or whether you have a church or an institutional religion or not, they have no right to legislate what goes on in the secular world. And that's a big topic right now. You could take that one issue, pop it into 2021 and see where that's being lived out. He used logic and coupled it with values. The next slide would be his picture. And of course, in a stained glass window. Next, there he is, beautifully. And the next slide I found was the same picture, but his hands were showing a light. Look at that magic, but that was with the light. The next is some of his writing beside himself. His picture there, that's William. And next, another cut of him. Next, that's We Are All Brother. We Are All Brothers, written in Latin with his picture there. Next, some of his writing. You can't read it. I couldn't either, but it's been written down, and that's why we can know what he said. And the next is what he's most famous for. He didn't call it this. The next slide, Occam's razor, is simply his statement that if you've got competing solutions to a problem, the one with the least complications very well likely will be right. And his wisdom for us is in the next slide. The explanation requiring the fewest assumptions is most likely to be correct. When learning about life and people, make no more assumptions than are absolutely necessary. Ask and observe. I saw this happening in spades at the last board meeting, and I hear it happening in conversations with us. The assumptions, I'm going to even say, if you could raise your hand, if you've made an assumption about someone in your lifetime and it turned out to be incorrect, please indicate with a hand, I have done so. Have you done so? Or have you had someone that you made an assumption about incorrect and it was from that, and you would proceed it. We learn from opening up our assumptions and helping them see the light of day. So the next slide, we've been doing what Kenko invited us to do, to sit alone together in the lamplight of the screen with these words from the past spread out before us. And we've held intimate converse with these people. Perhaps they had a different sense of how they grounded their knowledge. Some of them had a secular sense of that. Some of them grounded it in the church or in the scriptures. Some of them may have felt differently, but disclosed them at their peril. And we've done much work on this grounding issue at West Hill. But these people, whatever their ground was, they came up with the same common values, which is stunningly reaffirming to us. The people we've been looking at grounded themselves in the values as well, the common values. The next slide, Peter. Guided by love and growing in wisdom. We heard that in everything they were saying, from the 1200s past the 13s, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. The wisdom of the human race has been there. And the next slide, I encourage you to connect with this long wisdom. We have a big human family. We have a long history together, and much wisdom has come from there, much struggle to get it here. There's differences, but there's similarities. There's skeletons in the closet with these people we've looked at, just like us. There's small victories over injustice, just like the ones we know. But everyone contributed to where we are today. And then I encourage us to celebrate that these people lived, that they did what they did, that they said what they said, that somebody wrote it down, that somebody passed it on, and that these values live today because the human community has held them as we hold them together when we meet together, and then separated out into our communities where we hold it, that we celebrate every act of humans being kind in humankind. And the last point being that to continue on and carry on, hundreds of years from now, if someone does a PowerPoint presentation and we're included in it in some way, shape, or form, maybe not as individuals, but as groups we belong to, it would be worthy of celebrating that these values lived on and were practiced with sweat and with courage and with hard work. And also now I want to continue on that I didn't hear much about the environment from the 1200s. A little more as the years went on, but we are adding to this wisdom with our statements and our work and our commitment to the environment, because that's what needs our human wisdom now. So those will be on the screens of a PowerPoint done years from now, that the wisdom for the environment. And then lastly, just to be encouraged to carry on seeing yourself as part of a very big story, a very big narrative. You may have had smaller stories in certain books and certain wherever, but just to expand yourself to when we say you're not alone, we're part of a big history. And the last slide is just reminding us we're part of a big history as human beings, as humans being, and I celebrate that for every single person on the screens that we are meeting with today, for being human, which means falling, which means stumbling, which means learning that you might have messed something up, and then going back into the humankind, and hopefully from all of us receiving a welcome. Sometimes it's a welcome back, sometimes it's a welcome up, sometimes it's a welcome over. But the humankind is to be that kind. I'm going to ask Peter not to put the next issue on because of our time, which is absolutely fine. And I just will mention what we will sing next week, which is Chris New's song, Our Highest Values. And so that's what we're celebrating and remembering and committing to carry on. I hope you've got to know the 1200s a little bit more. It was really thrilling for me to look at those pictures and those people and hear that music. And here we are today in 2021, but part of the same human family together. I wanted to say at the end here, how many from our human family are Canadians living in Canada? If you could just raise your hand to show the people, Canadians living in Canada. Okay. How many are Canadians living in Canada, but not in the Toronto area? How many are Canadians, but not in the Toronto area? How many are living across the water in the UK? Could you show us yourselves from the UK? How lovely. And I think I didn't see Africa popping on today, but I'm just going to ask, because often we have Africa. Sometimes the reception is very poor in that. US. So, sorry? US. The US. Finally, who's our US person there? There we go, John. And I think is it Emily? Somebody is coming on from the States, and Myrna, yes, thank you. See you there. We're thinking of you. We are watching things all the time. You're part of us, and it matters immensely. So go into your week. We're going to have a breakout time. If you want, just don't leave and say goodbye. If you would like to join a breakout room for a more intimate discussion with some folks, but if you do leave, we go into a week where we are joining the rest of humankind, and with hopefully a refreshed and renewed commitment to be kind to one another. Farewell. See you on Tuesday. See you on the Tuesday night discussion. Come and discuss with your wisdom, and Thursday for coffee, and back here Sunday for the get together and our congregational meeting. Farewell. Thank you for being together. Love you all.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
There's
Scott
Rebecca. Just saw
and
Africa.
team.
Just saw Africa.